Are you looking for more out of your life? Do you need ideas on how to start new businesses and how to move forward in your own personal life? Well, guess what? You have come to the right radio show. At You Can Overcome Anything podcast show, you will learn and hear from many people from all walks of life who are sharing their challenges, their stories, the habits, and the mind shifts they had to overcome to become who they are today. On top, you will get a chance to connect and see how you can overcome anything by networking and learning about your next move through this radio show. I present to you our great speakers at You Can Overcome Anything podcast show with your host, Cesar Espino. Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of You Can Overcome Anything podcast show. It is your host, Cesar Espino, and today I have a special guest. His name is Cody McAuliffe. How are you, Cody?
Amazing. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for being here. Just to kind of give the listeners and viewers a little bit of your background, and we can then dive into it. Cody is a speaker who specializes in taking leaders and teams from force to flow. He does this by using the flow formula modality he created, which is based on testing people's epigenetic expression. This means that leaders can understand how their brains work differently to others to ultimately get into flow and become superhuman. Wow, that sounds very interesting. So definitely I'm interested to know more about that. Yet prior that we get into that, I want to know more about you, your background, where are you originally from, and where are you joining us?
Yeah, so I currently live in the Gold Coast, Australia, and I grew up in kind of country Australia in a town of, I think it was about 6,000 or 7,000 people. So a small country town, bit of a country boy.
Yeah.
And I guess my journey really started when I first started out in business about 10 years ago. So it was 2010. I started out as a personal trainer and kind of transitioned from there to different forms of coaching. Basically, people, when I was a PT, people kept asking me how my business was going so well, and I kept answering their questions and realized that, hey, I could probably earn some money from these conversations rather than just give people all this free advice. So I moved into business coaching for PTs, and I think one of the turning points for me in my journey was I'd got to a point where I was more successful than I'd ever been. I was presenting all over the country at the top conventions and things of that nature in the industry that I was in, and I was earning more money than I'd ever had before. And at the same time, I had this experience where I was basically driving down the highway near my place, and I had this experience where I'd like pulled up at a set of traffic lights and had tears streaming down my face, and I had this thought where it was just like, if I pull out into traffic right now, like what's going to happen is my car is going to be taken out by a truck and my life will be over, but it won't look like a suicide because I couldn't do that to my family. And it was really this point of change for me. It was this point of realizing that what I was doing was not really fulfilling me. It was not really lighting me up, even though I had all of the trappings of success. I'd done all of the things that people said I should do. And it was really this defining moment for me to realize, okay, well, if I'm having these thoughts, then I kind of need to make some shifts. I need to get some support. I need to work on the different components in my life to be able to ultimately get to a point of fulfillment and happiness that I ultimately craved. In hindsight, I realized that's what I was looking for. At the same time, like in that moment, that was all I thought. I was just thinking about, all right, well, how can I get out of this experience? How can I get out of this life even? And that was really that defining moment for me to really start to create that shift. And that's when I became obsessed with performance, obsessed with mindset, obsessed with leadership, obsessed with flow, all of these different things that led me to kind of where I am today, of actually starting to work with people in a leadership capacity, in a flow capacity, to be able to get that life of flow and fulfillment, which I'm committed to creating. And as you said when you read out the introduction, like I'm committed to creating what I call a superhuman society, and that's a society where each person comes from their unique innate gifts, so that they can have their foundational needs met, so they can come from their higher needs of growth and contribution, which is ultimately going to create a life of flow and fulfillment for us. And in hindsight, that's what I was missing in that experience. That's what was like, I had all the trappings of success. I was ticking all those boxes. And at the same time, I didn't have that sense of fulfillment. I didn't have that sense of aliveness. I wasn't really living the life that my soul had even intended as part of it. And that became my passion, my purpose, and my mission to be able to create that, number one, for myself as a foundational level, and then start to create that for other people. Because what I notice is there's so many other people in that exact same experience in different ways, whether they're living their life based on societal expectations, living their life based on what they should be doing. And at the same time, it's not really lighting them up. It's not giving them that sense of aliveness that they deeply crave within their being. And that became part of the journey for me. So yeah.
And so that's interesting. And you mentioned, you were having a lot of success. You were checking up all those boxes. So I guess, how did it lead you to, one of the biggest things you had to overcome was depression, right? And having those thoughts and all those things. What happened, whether it's in your, I don't know if it was in your childhood or when you were growing up, what happened that led you to being in that state of mind of depression, and or getting into that space where, a lot of times, we have these suicidal thoughts or these ideas of, I don't belong here, I don't want to be here in this world, even though you have so much success monetary wise, deep down you were having a lot of fights within your head, right? So how did you get to that point?
Yeah, I think that the ultimate point was this trilogy of things, really, because it was this experience of, number one, my mum had died maybe 6 years before, and I hadn't experienced like any of the grief around that. So that was just building up in my system. Number two, I had a relationship end, which reactivated all of that grief, of all of that abandonment, all of the different things that came along with that. And then also, even though I was more successful than I'd ever been, I had like a massive tax debt. So it's like crippling tax debt, didn't even know necessarily how much I owed, all of these different things. It was these three things that came together and just became this perfect storm of experience to be able to go, well, fuck, it's just hopeless. It's just this experience of like, well, what can I do with any of this? What is even the point of this? It's like, there's no way out of this, all of these different things. I can't feel all these feelings. I can't do all the different components of going through what it would take to actually shift it all. So like, well, what's the point of it all? And that was just a combination of those things, and stepping out of it just became going through each of those things individually to be able to start to go through that grief, go through all of the wounds that had come up around that, go through and actually clean up my integrity with the tax department and things like that. All of the things just to be able to get to the point where I can actually start to create that deep sense of meaning and fulfillment in my life, so that then I can be a stand for other people to do the same.
Right. Yeah. And how long were you in that space of kind of the uncertainty, the depression, before you kind of step out of it and said, you know what, I got to start facing each one of these things head on?
I think it was just a progressive evolution. Like that tipping point would have been like, the relationship ended in the start of June, and then I'd moved. I'd basically uprooted my life and moved as well. And in July was probably when I had that experience of driving down the road, maybe August. And then from there, it was just like, it was a decision point to start to step out of it. And it wasn't just like this instant shift. It's the bottoming out experience to start to step one step at a time out of it. And then it became a journey from then to even now of actually starting to work through all of those things to really start to create those shifts by actually just starting to own, okay, cool. Well, what's the current work that I get to do in myself, that I get to step into the next evolution of who I am as a human, and who I get to be, and who I am in relation to even my integrity and my embodiment of my message as part of it, because it's an ongoing journey. It becomes this opportunity for us to consistently have it get better, because like, if you're first starting to get out into the work, you're like, oh my God, this is a never ending journey. How depressing. And when we start to get into it, it's like, oh, it's a never-ending journey. That means it gets better and better and better and better and better, and it consistently gets better. The deeper that we go into the work, the more that we can actually take stock of where we're at and how we can start to overcome any of the pains that we actually have, because our pain can become our power, our mess becomes our message, our test becomes our testimony. All of these things is how we can actually start to overcome any of the obstacles to be able to develop that resilience in us, so that we can actually start to really create what we're here to create in this lifetime by actually just being with what our experiences are in any of those instances, which is ultimately what it's all about.
Right. And I know, and so you deal with primarily with leaders or businesses that are looking at that. And if I take that away from that for 1 second, and maybe you come across this or have some advice, a lot of times, just the generic people, people that are the civilians that are out there, a lot of times they're afraid to face those fears, or to look at those challenges head on, and rather they try to numb the pain. And at the end of the day, like numbing the pain or trying to get distracted from really facing and grieving and going through that is going to end up hurting you more long term. How or what would you tell somebody that might be going through something like that, yet at the end of the day, they are numbing the pain, they are trying to put it away, they are trying to not look at it, and sooner or later you have to face it, or you're going to end up losing yourself to depression?
Yeah, 100%. And that's exactly what I would say to them. I'd be like, well, I get it, totally get exactly where you're coming from, and you'll want to do that, because I did that too. Like, even in that experience, I used to, when I was in the depths of it, when I was having those thoughts, and the lead up to that, it was like, all right, well, I'd get up. The reason why I was on that path, on that drive, is because there was a coffee place that opened at 5 o'clock in the morning. That was the earliest coffee place that opened around me. And I'd go there, I'd get a triple shot coffee, and then I'd go to the office and go and work. And then I'd have 4, 5, 6 coffees during the day to be able to just get through the day, and then to wind down. That's to numb through the day. And then, because you've had your uppers, you got to have your downers. It's like, well, I'd start with a glass of wine, and then it'd turn into a bottle, and then it'd turn into 2 bottles, and then it'd turn into 3 bottles, just to be able to get through a day. So my first thing would be like, I totally get it. Like, I've been there, and there's a cost to that. And part of it is going, well, like, for me, the greatest shift was the willingness to start to go, okay, cool, well, there's something that actually needs to shift here. And sometimes it takes that bottoming out experience for us to really start to rise beyond that. Or we can start to create that choice to say, this is the bottom right now, and let's start to look at those numbing mechanisms. Let's start to look at those areas where we're unwilling to feel those things, and just ultimately just taking it one step at a time. Because in most instances, people are most unwilling to do that because of this perception that it's going to be this overwhelming experience. It's like, it's just too much to go through, rather than just going, okay, well, this is what's present for me right now. Let's actually start to go through this. Let's actually start to go through how we can create access to what is coming up for us in any moment. Because when I talk about the superhuman society, it's really all about how we can have our foundational needs met. All right, what are my needs that are being unmet right now, so I can actually start to create those, so then I can come from my higher needs of growth and contribution to be able to live that life of flow and fulfillment. Because the alternative is, then I just stay down over here in the same thing playing out again and again and again, and it just becomes this cycle of life that just consistently perpetuates and plays out. And we have the opportunity to be able to take to take another choice at any point in our life. Like, I'm reading a book right now called 3 Seconds by Les Parrott. And one of the things that he talks about is it takes 3 seconds to be able to change our thoughts, basically. Like, if a thought comes up instinctually, in a lot of instances, it comes up, and we have the opportunity to be able to create the reframing of that, a shifting of that, to actually start to go above and beyond. Because in most instances, when those things come up for us, we just sell out, and we just hide things, or we go for a numbing mechanism. We want to have that gap between where we actually have that thought coming up of going, all right, let's go have a bottle of wine to be able to avoid this, and go, okay, well, there's something coming up in me. I'm going to take the time to be able to actually work through it right now, which is ultimately the choice that we have. We have that choice consistently, and it's the hardest part about it is just it's an ongoing choice. It's not a choice that you make once. It's a choice that you make again and again and again. And determining how committed you are to be able to create that shift will determine how much you can actually grow through that. So
right. And there's a quote by Les Brown, and he said, if you do what is easy, your life will be hard. If you do what is hard, your life will be easy. And so when we look at that perspective, people tend to do the things that are easy, yet their life continues to be really hard. And when you do the things that are hard and you don't want to do them, though, eventually it's going to start getting easier and easier, right? And the other thing that comes to mind is that there's about 60 to 70,000 thoughts per day going through our heads, right? Of those 60 to 70,000 thoughts, 80% of them are from previous days, and 90% of them are negative. So there's a lot of negativity going on. And so if you're in that state of mind, it can definitely take you down. So how did the flow formula come about with you? Because obviously you've been studying the brain, you've been studying the mind, you've been studying a lot of those things. How did that come about for you?
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that I was kind of playing with in my business was the personalization of everything. When we look at someone's epigenetic expression, it's basically just how your genes are currently expressing themselves right now. So right now, my genes are expressing themselves in one way and yours are expressing themselves in a different way. If we can understand how that expression is occurring and how we can actually start to shift that on an individual level, then we can start to create whatever shift we choose. Because for me, we had the psychological component of my depression, but then we also had the physiological component of my depression as well, which was playing out, which is different for each person. If I'm in depression, it's going to be suppressed through this mechanism of anger in a lot of instances and suppression, whereas for other people, it might show up based on a lead indicator of digestive issues. Because if someone has a predominance of serotonin in their system, then what happens is then that's predominantly in the gut. Over 70% of the serotonin is in the gut. So if that goes off, if their digestion goes off, then everything else starts to fall apart as part of it, because then they're not actually having that serotonin drip into their system, which is not making them feel good. And it creates this downward spiral for each person. So as soon as I started to dive deeper into that, it's like, even if we talk about depression, there's so many different reasons why people can actually get into depression, and so many different ways that people get out of it. So what if we could codify exactly what created that for an individual and actually start to create a individualized step-by-step process to be able to get out of that? Because it's going to be completely different if I'm in depression in this instance compared to you or compared to someone else. There's, like, when we look at the different kinds of people, some people work really well with, say, talk therapy or psychoanalysts. Like if they do that, it becomes extremely beneficial for them to be able to externalize that, because they're more external processes based on how their brain works. Alternatively, on the other end of the spectrum, there's other people that are high beta brainwave frequency people, and they're very sensitive. We call them sensors. If they start to talk about things, they actually start to overthink about things, and it actually creates more of those thoughts, more of that depressive frame of reference. So even as the individuals, the exact same strategy doesn't work for everyone. And this plays out in the context of depression as well as then peak performance and leadership, because yes, it very much started with me being in this frame of reference of how do I get out of depression and how do I start to perform again. And it becomes the same thing. It's like, well, how do I understand how my brain functions differently to other people, so that then I can channel that into what I'm here to be able to create? How do I also understand how that works with other people, so that if I'm leading them, I understand, well, what's going to be going on for them internally, because their model of the world, their perceptions are going to be different to mine. And if I can start to create that shift in them, then everything starts to shift for both of us. Because in most instances, whether it's in a relationship or in leadership capacity, one of the core things that we look at is like the conflict which is playing out. And conflict is only really ever created from two things. Number one, it's created from unmet needs based on our biology. So if our biology is for me, it's based on adrenaline and testosterone. So if I don't have challenge, then that's an unmet need, and then everything starts to downward spiral for me. The other example that we talked about of the serotonin before is another example of the kind of lead domino, which creates a downward spiral. And the second component is communication. It's like, well, conflict is created when what is said is not what is heard. And when we can actually start to communicate to ensure what is said is what is heard by understanding how the other person listens, well, then we can actually start to go from, in most instances, conflict to commitment to actually work towards things, which is what it's really all about in the context of leadership. It's going from this place of, well, there's conflict playing out here, to actually commitment to work towards a common goal, to work towards a common vision that we're here to be able to create, whether that's in a coaching capacity or a management capacity, any of these different things. Even as a parent, that's what it's ultimately all about. We're creating this depth of communication to be able to create that deeper sense of connection to get to that point of commitment to actually work towards things in the future, which is ultimately what it's all about.
Right. And so, so based on that, you are looking at, essentially you're trying to look at what the people's learning style, whether it's visual, kinesthetic, auditory, all that stuff into play, and then create something for them. Do you look at the idea of, even talking about communication, right, which is huge. And a lot of times why people, again, you may be saying something and somebody else is hearing something different, is because they're also, in my opinion, in different vibrational wavelengths, right? That they're not listening to the same thing. So do you take all of that into perspective too, and look at how somebody's mind might be vibrating in terms of how they see things and or listen to things versus somebody else?
Yeah, definitely. So when we look at where someone's at, there's really two primary things which is going on. Number one, their level of thought, and there's different levels of thought based on where people are at. You can use different models to looking at that, like spiral dynamics or developmental stages, all of these different things which play out on a mental level. And then you've also got that physiological level, which is like, okay, cool. Does this brain predominantly work in a theta brainwave frequency, or is it more beta? Because that's going to determine how that person listens, how that person communicates, how that person actually takes on feedback, all of these different components. And yes, that will partially link into their representation systems, like if they're auditory, kinesthetic, all of those different components. And we go beyond that to actually start to go, okay, well, why is that person more kinesthetic compared to this person? And what flavor is that kinesthetic compared to someone else? Because it's really driven by our biology. If we're what we call a crusader, driven by dopamine, and that means that you want to tick all of those boxes, which is what I was doing in my life, but it wasn't creating that deep sense of fulfillment because there was no vision there as part of it. So as soon as we can actually start to have this operating manual of each individual person, we can go, okay, cool, well, this is how this person operates. Let's actually work with that instead of against that. Because if I've got a completely different operating system over here, a lot of the times they don't communicate, they don't cross over fully. So that's when that conflict occurs. And if that conflict occurs, well, then that creates more unmet needs. And then we're in a downward spiral of that experience, whether that's in the depths of experience of depression or whether that's in a leadership capacity. It's still the same dynamics that's playing out for us to really start to see what's underneath all of it for each individual person, and understanding what their drivers inherently are, which is ultimately what it's all about.
Right. Yeah. Definitely. No, I like that. And so, walk me through. Maybe give me a couple of tips. In terms of how you are helping people to become that superhuman, to be able to unlock their latent and superhuman potential. Right. To be able to get to that. What are some things that you go through on you have a 12-week process, right? 12-week self-leadership program to help them become that. What are some things that people will take away from doing that or using those principles with you?
Yeah, definitely. The core thing is the understanding that like leadership and flow is very personalized and individualized. So when people work with us in the 12-week Becoming Superhuman program, that's ultimately all about creating personal flow. It's really about self-leadership. The depth at which you can lead yourself determines the depth at which you can lead others. So it's ultimately all about self-leadership so that you can actually start to create flow within yourself. And then eventually we start to have people work with us in our 7-month leadership certification, where that's creating flow for other people, which is the leadership capacity. It's how do we create team flow? Because it's all well and good. Most people can create some flow for themselves. It's really how do we create that more often, multiple times throughout the day rather than just once, which is what most people experience. They can get into this productive flow state, and then it's just like, well, then the rest of the day is just a write-off. How do we create more of that on a foundational level? And then also, how do we start to go, well, how do you create that for other people? How do you create that for your team? How do you create that for others to be able to step into that place where they can start to lead other people to be able to get flow for them as well? And part of that is there's different components that we look at in the foundational level of the 12-week Becoming Superhuman program. There's the epigenetic expression component of it, to be able to map that out and actually go through and put that into the AI system to actually have the outputs of what that looks like for an individual. As well as you're talking about, like the thought levels or the energetic alignment component of that, because if energetically they're in a different kind of frequency, as you said, well, then it doesn't matter if they understand the epigenetic expression, they're not actually going to do the actions which are going to align with that. So it has that second pillar as part of it. And then the third pillar of that is like returning to our core essence, where we can actually start to return to our unique innate gifts that are lying dormant within us, which are crying to be expressed. One of the things that I talk about in my book is the quote by Terence McKenna, where he says that I was looking in the mirror naked, and what I realized was I was still clothed with societal conditioning. And what we start to look at with that is we're all conditioned to fit into this box of what normal is, and yet we have these unique innate gifts to be able to bring to the world that are crying to be expressed in the world, that are needed in the world. And the more that we can start to bring those to the forefront, the more that we can actually start to own those, the more that actually gives other people permission to be able to do the same thing, which brings it back to what we're looking at creating in terms of that superhuman society, where we can come from those higher needs of growth and contribution to live that life of flow and fulfillment. And when we can start to bring those things to the forefront, that gives other people permission to do the same. Because one of the things that's occurring right now is we're having this shift in society where we're starting to have all of these meaningless jobs start to be taken over by technology. It's like AI is going to be taking out all of like drivers and all of these different things, all of these things that don't really require much brain power. It's just like, we're just doing the thing. It's just an unconscious process for us. It's easy. And eventually what will occur is we have all of these meaningless jobs which are completely gone. And what that then creates is the opportunity for humanity is to only create from our unique innate gifts, from the unique expression that we are as an individual, that we get to then channel through what we're creating in this creative expression, whether that's through a business or art or any of these different things. It really allows us to really start to bring those unique innate gifts to the world. And that's the opportunity that people have right now to be on the forefront of that, because eventually it's going to happen. Eventually those jobs will just disappear, and we'll only have meaningful jobs. We'll only have purpose-filled jobs for humans to be able to create. And that's an exciting time. It's an exciting time for humanity to actually start to create that shift, because along with that comes the rise and the level of the collective consciousness of humanity at the same time. Because we're no longer channeling all of our energy into these meaningless things just to be able to tick the box, just to be able to pay the bills, just to be able to do those things. It really creates the unlocking of the potential of humanity, which is ultimately what it's all about. So
yeah, and I love that. It reminds me of the quote by Albert Einstein. Imagination is everything. It is the preview of the upcoming attractions, right? And so going back to what you're saying, exactly, like there's so much that we have within our, between our 2 ears, and we can definitely, once we can tap into that and know how to tap into that in a positive flow, then the ideas are endless, right? Because there's everything we see and everything we have came out of a thought, an idea that somebody had from that perspective. Obviously you have this flow and things to that. For those that are listening to us and don't really understand the difference between a human person versus a superhuman, how do you define a superhuman with you?
For me, a superhuman is that person that is actually living from that place of growth and contribution. Because what occurs is when we have growth and contribution, when we grow and then we contribute, it becomes this infinite cycle of this perpetuating of energy, which becomes more than just what all of these latent energies which are there for us. It becomes this energizing experience, because as we grow, we contribute more, and we grow and contribute more, and we can come from those higher needs. Ultimately, that's where the magic occurs, because we're no longer filtering through all of these lower level things where it just becomes draining for us to actually show up to work or whatever it is. We just have this perpetuating energy, which actually consistently energizes us more. When we look at flow, we look at flow based on like the 4 different components of it. We define it by what it's not, because it's non-contextual. So it's different for each person. So the 3 things that we define it by what it's not, and 1 thing that we define it by what it is. So those 3 things are selflessness. So when we step outside the construct of the internal voice in our mind, outside the construct of our internal dialogue, well, then we're in flow, when we're outside that perspective of the self. Then we have an experience of timelessness, when our perception of time shifts, whether it either speeds up or it slows down. Chances are every person's had that experience where you've just been with this person and time's just gone like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We've had that experience of that distortion of time, or in another instance, we might have been in a test or something where time slowed down. It's just taking forever to experience the end of something. That becomes an experience of our distortion of time. And then the 3rd component of that is effortlessness. when the effort becomes effortless, we're in flow. So they're the three things that it's not, because that's non-contextual then. It's like, okay, cool. You apply that to your situation because you might be able to do that in exercise. You might be able to do that as an athlete on the sporting field, or you might be able to do that in business. Those are the three key components that we start to define the boundaries of it. And the final component is the experience of richness, where the purpose of the activity becomes the activity. Because then it just becomes this perpetuating experience. When we talked about that growth and contribution thing before, it just becomes this perpetuation of it. Just becomes this thing where we become at one with the activity that we're actually doing. We're no longer seeing the separation between us and the thing. If you have Roger Federer, like the Australian Open was recently on in Australia. And if you think about Roger Federer, when he's in the zone, the racket becomes an extension of his body. It's not like this other thing. It's this extension where he actually becomes one with it. And then he can actually start to preemptively start to move based on how he can actually get to the ball. And this was one of the things that they experienced as tennis players, because they had this outbreak of like COVID in Melbourne when it was actually on, and all of the stands were empty. So they had this experience where they had the stands full, and then midway through the tournament, they're empty. What that then created for those athletes was this heightened sense of connection to the ball, because they could actually hear it come off the racket even. Because you couldn't hear that with the crowd before. It instantly created this deeper sense of flow because they were so attuned to the ball, so at one with that experience, that it became an extension of them. And when they were in flow, it meant that they could automatically just get into the thing, complete it, and have this experience of that oneness with the racket, with the ball, with this experience of that flow as part of it. And it just becomes this perfect example of how it can play out. And we can have that play out in a leadership scenario, in business, in all of these different areas, in our family, with our intimate partner, if we understand what creates that for us as an individual, which is exactly what we do in all of our programs.
Right. Wow, that's awesome. That's definitely, I can already see there's so much information within your program. Cody, before I let you go, where can people find you if they wanted to connect with you?
The best place to be able to find me is just to connect with me on Facebook. That's where I'm most active. It's just at the Cody McAuliffe, which would most likely just be in the show notes. And
yep.
the where we put the most content is just in our legendary leaders and coaches Facebook community, because that's where we post most of our content. That's where we're the most active. So to be able to get the best material from us, that's the place to go.
Yeah, definitely. And then in terms of, obviously, you've studied this and you've gone through a lot of that. Besides what you're doing, are there any things that you do on a day-to-day basis to kind of keep you in this positive mindset, knowing that although there has been some challenges and you've fallen down a couple of different times, obviously, you've gotten up. Are there any things you do besides the things that you show on your program, you personally?
Yeah, definitely. Like, there's always rituals that we'll go through to be able to keep us on track as part of it. And some of the rituals that I go through on a daily basis is doing some form of breath work to actually start to get back into my system as part of it. And again, there's different forms of breath work based on how their brain functions differently to other people. So I do breath work every day. And the other component is just consistently exercising every day as well. And again, that links back to my epigenetic expression, because if it's the primary way that my needs get met is through exercise. So it's my number one priority. It's the only group of epigenetic expressions that has that as the number one. Most people are like, oh yeah, food, these exercise is most important. Yeah. And for most people, that's actually like third, fourth, or fifth as part of it. And this was one of the shifts that I started to learn, was like I was in between some of that experience. I was a lecturer for Sports Nutrition Australia, and I was like lecturing for all of these people. And then I found out that like 50% of people, mind is more important than their food. So the more they think about their food determines how they actually digest all of these different things. And it's like, well, I'm telling people to eat all of these different things, and yet 50% of people, mind is more important to them. So that became a critical shift for me to start to go, okay, cool. Well, what is the most important thing for me? And when I learned that was exercise for me. And yet that again that's 20% of people that could potentially have exercise as their number one. So it's number one, determining, okay, what is the thing that's going to light me up the most as a ritual? And it's going to be different for each person. And how do I just bring that and create that part of my daily deliberate disciplines? If I have a daily deliberate discipline to exercise, then I'm going to feel much more alive as part of that. Whereas if it's for someone who has mind as their number one priority, then it's like, okay, cool, let's look at meditation as their daily deliberate discipline as part of that, because it's going to be individual as part of it. And the more that we can start to do that and even learn, okay, what meditation is going to be best for this person, how can we actually start to create that truly personalized and individualized approach as part of it? So when I do that, I always preface a lot of the things that I talk about and what I do is specifically for me, and then it may not be the same for other people. And as soon as you understand what your individual brain is and how it functions, then you can just start to go, okay, cool, I have with absolute certainty, this is the thing that you need to be doing to get the best results in the shortest possible time.
Right. Wow. No, that's awesome. I love that. And definitely I've done breath work. I haven't done much of that. I know that that's a pretty good technique. And the time that I did, it was, for me, it was so amazing because it really put me in a very vulnerable state of mind, yet it opened up a lot of different things. So there's different things that you can do for sure. And definitely people should kind of check out all those different things, see what they can use for themselves. The last question I have for you is, if people are going through any kind of challenge, whatever challenge that might be, what is one thing that you can tell them that they can do right now to start overcoming that challenge?
Yeah, good question. For me, it would definitely be just to reach out for support. Like, one of the core things when I was in that experience was like, okay, I've been doing this on my own. The last thing that I want to do right now is reach out for support. And like, it's probably the best thing that's going to actually happen. If I look at these inflection points in my life, most of them have been when I've actually had the courage to go, all right, I need support in this. I need to work with a coach. I need to work with a psychologist. I need to work with someone to actually fast track this. Because I love what Dan Sullivan says. You can do it yourself, or you can pay a coach, and you're really just paying for speed.
Yeah. Right.
And this is the thing, when we have the courage to be able to ask for that support, everything starts to shift for us. Everything starts to shift because we're no longer filtering it through our perspective. We can actually start to get outside of ourselves and go, oh, okay, cool. This is actually what's playing out for us. This is how we can move through it much faster. So that's my recommendation. Often, like, I 100% understand when I was in that experience, it was the absolute last thing that I wanted to do. And so many times when I've had that experience, so many times where I've had this exponential shift in my business, it hasn't been from me. It's been from me just starting to have the courage to go, all right, well, I would love support in this, to start to really own that if I can do it with someone, it's going to be much more powerful than if I just do it on my own, because I'm probably just going to go back into old habits as part of it. So that would be my recommendation for anyone that's at that point, regardless of where you're at. It's just asking that question. Well, all right, who can support me in this? Who's going to be the best person to support me? Because that's just going to fast track it, which is ultimately what most of us want.
Yeah, definitely. No, I love that. I love that. Cody, again, thank you so much. This was a really good conversation. Anything else that you might want to share before I let you go?
It's just thanking you for putting this together. Like, I've put together, over the years, I've had 3 different podcasts, and I know the time, energy, and effort that goes into creating it, editing it, getting all these different things, posting, finding new guests, all of these different things. It takes a lot of time, energy, and effort. And it's an honor for people to be able to share their audience with me and allow me to be able to share my message, to share what I've overcome and bring that to the world. So thank you for putting this together. It's an honor to be able to share to your audience.
Awesome. Well, and I'm glad to have you here. So thank you again for being on the show.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. And for the rest of you guys, do me a favor. Please make sure you check out Cody at Facebook. I'm going to be putting all the information on the link so you can actually follow him. And stay tuned for the next episode of You Can Overcome Anything podcast show. Bye.
Hi, I'm Cesar Espino, real estate investor, business coach, and consultant, and author of the book, You Can Overcome Anything, Even When the World Says No. My number is 424-501-6046. In my book, I talk about making the necessary changes to shift your mind for prosperity and certainty. Pick up your copy at Amazon. I also love helping families with their real estate and can purchase your house fast and all cash. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. My number is 424-501-6046.
Thank you for having me today. I am so glad you've tuned into this podcast. You can find me at your favorite podcast platform where you can like, subscribe, comment, and share. And to learn more about myself, my services, you can find me at www.cesarrespino.com, or you can also find me at your social media. Thanks for joining me, and I am looking forward to having you at the next episode. And know you truly can overcome anything.